A very good morning. You are keeping it here on NBS Television. This is the breakfast meeting with myself, Jackie Mutasi. Now here at the breakfast meeting, we talk to different organizations, different businesses to help us understand what they are doing to make our world a better place in the different sectors that they're operating in. This morning, we're going to be discussing matters oil and gas. Now, ever since the discovery of oil here in Uganda in 2006, the government has done everything possible to ensure that we see our first drop in 2025. Whilst we've recently moved from the exploration to the production stage, activists and citizens alike are concerned about the eventualities or possibilities of an oil spill and wondering how prepared is our government when it comes to managing an oil spill in the case that that should happen. So joining me this morning are two gentlemen to address any concerns, any issues, to also give us an update on the industry as well. And joining me this morning is Mr. Ronald Angutuko. Lovely to have you. You are the Environmental Officer at the Petroleum Authority of Uganda. Lovely to have you this morning, Ronald.
Thank you, Jackie, and good morning to our viewers.
Thank you. Also joining us this morning is Paul Timwebaze. He's a research fellow with the Advocates Coalition for Development and Environment, ACCURD. Lovely to have you, Paul.
Yeah, thank you. Good morning, viewers.
Well, let's jump into our conversation. Perhaps I can start off with you, Ronald, giving us an update on the industry. We've recently moved from our exploration to our production stage. What is that looking like from the Petroleum Authority's side?
Well, as we speak today, a lot of work is ongoing. We are seeing the development phase taking shape, which is basically the putting in place of the required infrastructure that will support the production of oil and gas, and that should see us have our first oil by 2025. So basically what's going on is the putting in place of the facilities, the well pads, the pipelines, the flow lines, basically the infrastructure that is required to produce the oil out of the ground and process it and be able to export it. And we are working towards to make sure that this is achieved, and the sector is able to have first oil by 2025. So that is the phase that we are currently in. Yes.
Wonderful. Paul, perhaps I want to ask you, as a research fellow, you must understand what an oil spill is.
Yes.
So you're probably the best person to explain to us what an oil spill actually means.
Yeah, thank you so much. When you look at Uganda's oil spill, National Oil Spill Contingency Management Plan, it has a definition of an oil spill, but in a layman's understanding, we could call it any possible leakages of oil to the environment. When the oil and gas activities are running, there is a possibility that you can have some of the oil escape, let's say from the machines, let's say from storage facilities, let's say from the drilling processes, and finally join the environment. And yet it is not supposed to do so because of the potential harm it may pose to wildlife, to the humans, to the living organisms. So basically we say that we have an oil spill when we get that leakage of oil come out and spill in the environment.
Into the environment.
And then the plan for Uganda, actually even globally, classifies these spills into majorly three categories. We have a small spill where maybe oil may be less or the leakage is less. We have a medium spill, and then we have a large spill. The small spill is something that is very easy to manage, and of course the risk increases with the magnitude. And then the medium spill goes even more than just being managed at site, can include need for more effort to manage, because it may involve a wider area, it will involve larger effects. And then the large spill is very big. You are talking about too much leakage, like if you talked about like a pipeline bursting, if that eventuality happened, and you have oil spill in the environment, and actually as a component of the magnitude of the effect on the ecosystem, let's say transboundary resources such as rivers, because that's wide and can even go or require response that goes more than just one country. For example, if you look at our Lake Albert, if any spill occurred in Lake Albert, then we would classify that as a largest spill. So we have tier 1 for small ones, tier 2 for medium, and tier 3 for the large oil spills.
Okay. I'm just wondering, what is the impact of that? Perhaps we don't quite understand with Uganda, which is heavily blessed with wildlife, with an ecosystem, with nature. What would the impact of, say, a large spill look like in Uganda?
In Uganda, for example, you know, we are trying to develop our sector in an ecologically sensitive area, and in an eventuality of an oil spill at a level of tier 3 would have more serious effects, because you are talking about oil affecting the ecologically sensitive areas in Alberta and Rift, where we have our biggest numbers of protected areas, where we have our resources for tourism. You are talking about Murchison Falls National Park, where we are currently even doing drilling, where we have put the oil rigs. We are talking about the effects that could arise out of the project in Kingfisher, in Buhuka, which is on Lake Albert. And of course, oil is bad when it is not managed and escapes to the environment. Because, for example, on water, it has the capacity to pollute the lake and, of course, kill the fish and other aquatic life. Of course, you know, it seals off the top, on top of water, and minimizes the oxygen penetration into the waters where the aquatic life is supposed to survive, because they also breathe like us. So in an event that happens, so you could have even the problem expand beyond the boundaries of Uganda. You are talking about the network of rivers, because the ecosystem, the network of water here, you know how it is. So you have a spill running over, you have oil starting from Lake Albert and even stretching, and you start having Sudan complain, you start having Egypt complain, and it could quite be very, very, very dangerous. So that's why we say that we must manage and prevent such incidences from happening.
Speaking of prevention, we came up as a country, the National Environment Management Authority launched the oil spill contingency plan in 2020.
Yes.
So we have a sort of guideline in managing something like this, should it happen.
Yes.
But I want to ask you, Ronald, how involved are local governments in the oil and gas sector planning?
To start off with, and also to supplement a little bit on what my colleague has said, the current ongoing activities for the development and the production actually present one of the biggest risks of an oil spill. But now we need to speak a little bit more to what has actually been done to make sure that this risk is prevented and also is mitigated. To start off with, basically there are three key areas that I want to speak about here. The first one is the engineering and the design interventions that have been incorporated into these facilities to minimize this risk. The second one is the legal, regulatory, and the institutional framework that the country has put in place to prevent and also to manage oil spills. But then thirdly is the operationalization or the implementation of this legal and regulatory framework. Now, to start off with the engineering and the design measures, a lot of interventions are incorporated into the engineering, the design, and the operational philosophies for these projects. And I can speak to a few of these. One of them is to make sure that we have downhole safety valves when we're drilling a well. The other aspect is to make sure that our wellheads have what's called a blowout preventer. Basically, this helps you close off the well if there's an imminent risk of a blowout. Another example is the pipeline network has been incorporated with what we call block valves. So ideally, if there are any sensitive areas, you install block valves that will stop the flow of oil if there's a problem with the pipeline, whether it's a structural integrity has been compromised. Of course, there are other interventions like leak detection systems, overflow systems, overflow prevention systems for crude storage tanks, and also the operational philosophy of actually how these wells are being drilled. So all this has been incorporated into the design and the operational philosophy for these facilities. But even if all this has been done, there's unlikelihood that you can still have a spill. Now, that is now where the legal, regulatory, and the institutional framework comes into place. Now, to start off with, we have the Mother Act, which is the National Environmental Act of 2019. And this designates the Petroleum Authority of Uganda as the competent national authority for implementation of the National Oil Spill Contingency Plan. Now, this clause is operationalized by the National Environment Oil Spill Prevention, Preparedness and Response Regulations of 2020. Now, these regulations define a number of stakeholders, including the local governments as a lead agency, and it stipulates the roles and responsibilities of the different stakeholders, including the local governments, including the Office of the Prime Minister, which has a pivotal role of coordination, of operational coordination when there is an emergency. The Petroleum Authority is also, its roles and responsibilities are also defined in these regulations, and also the National Environmental Act, and also the National Emergency Coordination and Operations Center, which sits in the Office of the Prime Minister. So ideally, different stakeholders are identified and their roles and responsibilities are clearly defined in this framework. Okay. But lastly, the operationalization of this framework is very important, and I think that is the stage where we are at, to put in place the requirements that are stipulated to be in place to prevent and mitigate oil spills. And one most important one is the fact that any entity or any person who has or whose activity can lead to an oil spill is required to put in place measures that can deal with that oil spill. Firstly, by making sure that they have an oil spill contingency plan for their activity. Secondly, by making sure that they have the right equipment to respond to an oil spill. But thirdly, to also make sure that they have personnel that can implement or that can use the equipment to manage an oil spill. You're
absolutely right. All stakeholders' roles were outlined in the National Environment Act. Yes. But when it comes to the local government, their roles were also clearly stipulated in the National Environment Oil Spill Prevention, Preparedness and Response Act in 2020. Yes. So my question to you is, how prepared or how is the local government involved when it comes to oil and gas planning?
Well, because the risk of an oil spill happens where the project facilities are or where the activity is ongoing. And you know the local governments are the representation of the central government at that level. The local governments have a very key role to play. One, they are involved in any response operations, especially if it is a tier 2 or it is a tier 3. Now, tier 2 and tier 3, if I can just speak a little bit to that. Tier 2 is basically where the oil spill goes beyond the boundaries. Let's say if we have a well pad and there's an oil spill, and that spill goes beyond the boundaries of that well pad, that becomes a tier 2 oil spill. Now, the moment it goes beyond the boundary of the licensee, it means that for them to respond, they need the involvement of the local government. It could be that they need to relocate some people. It could be that they need to secure some additional land for them to be able to put in place interventions to manage the oil spill. They cannot do that without the involvement of the local government. So that's why the local government becomes very important in the response operations. But then also the other thing that needs to be considered is the fact that the National Oil Spill Prevention, Preparedness and Response Regulations designate a mandate on the local governments that the local governments as lead agencies need to have tier 2 oil spill response plans. Therefore, the local governments are mandated to put in place tier 2 oil spill response plans. And as we speak right now, we've taken a risk-based approach whereby we are working currently with the districts of Bulisa, Hoima and Chikube to establish their tier 2 oil spill response plans. This process is ongoing, and we are confident that we should be able to launch these plans in December. Then thereafter, we'll have the next phase where we'll address or work with the districts that are along the eco pipeline route to also put in place the tier 2 oil spill contingency plan. But also, the regulations also mandate that the districts or the local governments must have some reasonable level of capability to support oil spill response operations.
Reasonable level of capacity, did
Yes.
you say? So I want to come to you on that exact note, Paul. Given that the role of the local government is clearly outlined and they must have some reasonable level of capability to respond to an oil spill, would you say that the local government's capacity has been enhanced in the last few years to make sure that they can actually respond to said oil spill?
I think the answer to that is very clear. My colleague says they are yet to put in plans to help the local governments manage eventualities of oil spills. And I think the capacity building effort would be part of those plans, which are not yet in place. So that tells you that currently the local governments do not have the capacity.
But it's 2022.
But that's what we are saying.
Hoping.
It is now 2024. The National Oil Spill Contingency Plan was launched in 2020. And we expected work to commence immediately. The capacity development efforts for those key agencies that are within the plan should have been built. And because we cannot talk about building capacity after 4 years down the road. But you also need to know that the activities have been running. He said that what is happening now, the activities that are happening, activities of drilling, because we have rigs running, and this poses the most risky part of a likely oil spill. So we are having activities run before the desired preparedness for some of the key agencies. I think that is basically what he's communicating. Because if you are trying to work out with the district of Urisa and Chikube to build their capacity to manage tier 2 oil spill now, and you have not concluded on the development of the plans, the issue is what would happen now in an event that an oil spill occurred now, because activities are running. And then the other important point, you got an opportunity to have been interacting with the oil spill contingency management plan itself. When you read it, actually it provides that this plan will be always be reviewed every after 2 years. And now we are in 4 years. We've not had an opportunity of even reviewing it. And you cannot even talk about reviewing it before you implement a quota of what it proposes. So for me, yes, we are trying to do some preparedness, but I still have a feeling that it is not coordinated and even coherent. And as we talk now, if you interacted with the district local governments, you could hardly hear them speak about anything to do with oil spill management planning. They don't know what Some of them may not even tell you what an oil spill is. So we are still relying on centralized powers from the central government with less involvement of the district to local governments. And for me, if we appreciate that the district to local governments are near the sites, first of all, they are the first to be to get problems from the effects, and then number two, they are even would be the ones that trigger the whole system in terms of reporting. So if we should have actually started with even those. And then when you look at the coordination mechanism, you know how things have always been done in Uganda. The other day we saw when a python comes to your home, you call police. You have an accident, you call police. You have someone who has broken his leg while slashing, you will call police. Because that is what Ugandans know. So how is this supposed to run? Because you see that the oil spill management plan and even the laws provide quite a number of centers, but we need clear delineation of roles. Even when the roles are stipulated, it is very hard to follow in case now an oil spill occurred. We have, for example, when you look at the regulations and even the plan itself, it places the coordination and the overall oversight obligation to the Prime Minister's office under the Disaster Preparedness, Office of Disaster Preparedness and Management. And actually even the oil spill contingency plan is under that docket. So those are the guys responsible for even generating resources, supposed to coordinate, supposed to do the operations. And now, but again, you find that the same oil spill puts the obligations of a lead agency to NEMA. Now we start wondering, the ones who would be having, and we also have a competent agency, which is the Petroleum Authority of Uganda. Now the one who is competent in managing the spill does not have powers over resources. So it means that in case an oil spill occurred today, we would have now collision. You would have Petroleum Authority take years trying to coordinate with the Prime Minister's office, looking for logistics to manage a spill, yet the spill will not wait. And these are the coordination issues. Even the law itself has loopholes, because the spill places powers in a different entity. Then you find that the regulations place power in a different entity, and they say all these agencies must coordinate. But we want to know who is responsible in case a spill occurred today. He talked about the command center emergency in the Prime Minister's office. We don't even know whether it is operational now. You have seen how we have been managing our disasters, where you have floods in Kasese, and then it has to be UPDF or police to do emergency response. Now, we don't know whether it will happen, it will be the same, because we actually know that they also have roles in terms of security, logistics, and all those operations. But then you will start wondering now whether, for example, UPDF has a unit now specifically for managing an oil spill, because whether you have trained specific units in these agencies to manage an oil spill, how is the coordination going to be? Because having these laws, guidelines in place is one thing, but calling someone to come for an emergency and they tell you there is no one to sign for fuel or there is no equipment is another thing.
Paul, who is responsible, which government stakeholder or agency is responsible for enacting these policies, especially when it comes to the local government? So who is in charge? Are we talking to NEMA? Are we talking to the Office of the Prime Minister when we talk about capacity building for local government?
Now, when actually the oil spill contingency management plan was developed with the leadership of NEMA. Actually, the genesis started from 2014 when NEMA did a risk analysis for the exploration phase. Was we keep building, because oil spill contingency management planning has a component of planning and risk analysis, so that you do the preparedness, then you come and put in place the necessary tools and mechanisms, and then you have to respond when it happens, and then you have to do recovery. Now, it has been a journey, we appreciate. So it's NEMA was taking leadership in the initial stages, and even when you look at the oil spill contingency plan itself, most of the stakeholders that took leadership in its development were from NEMA, with support, of course, from the competent authority. That's what the law says, which is the Petroleum Authority of Uganda. And then there was also representation from the Prime Minister's office. Now, where the challenge is the contingency plan stems from the National Environment Act, which actually now puts most of responsibilities on the side of NEMA. And then when they developed the Petroleum Refining Conversion, Transmission and Storage Act, it also has provisions that guide in the management of oil spill, but you know this now puts emphasis on the competent authority, which is the Petroleum Authority of Uganda. So now we have every law putting in place a boss. And now we don't know how the coordination is supposed to be done, because we are likely to have pooling of powers. And it has already happened, because when you go to we have been doing work in the sector, you realize, whereas we are saying that the local governments are held high within these guidelines and within the law, they cannot access these sites. You are talking of the District Natural Resources Office, the District Environment Officer, who is a representative of NEMA on the district, who should be paying attention to NEMA, National Environment Management Authority issues at the district. But I bet you cannot have a District Natural Resources Officer of Hoima walk to the site and say, I'm coming to do work. You'll have to first seek clearance from the Petroleum Authority of Uganda. Now that means in an event of an oil spill, this person cannot do anything, because there is still a lot of bureaucracy to go through in order for this person to perform the work. So if you cannot access a facility, how will you monitor? How will you advise? Because you are restricted much as the law gives you the powers. So for me, it is still a puzzle. I know the oil spill contingency management plan got issues while we were developing it. I personally took part. You know, it was funded by NORAD, the Norwegian government, for very many years. Actually, the process took long, and some of the things got overtaken by events, because we never even had money to develop that. We were relying on Norwegians, and they took long. At one time, actually, its development was on a hold until we got more funding to complete it. That's why you even see we have it in place, but even implementing it is still a problem. And this brings me to the issue of resources. The resources are supposed to come from the Prime Minister's office. That's where the plan puts the resource basket and even the regulations. Now, where is the money? Where is the money to implement these things? He will tell us, because you could finally even find that the reason why we are not having the plan being followed the way it is supposed to be is because of limited resources. Yet operations are going on. And the review, if it was supposed to be reviewed by 2 years, it means we had envisaged that within 2 years we would have new things come on board. So what is happening? Because it is now 4 years. So we are implementing a plan that is outdated. That's basically what it means in terms of the technical language.
Ronald, what Paul is discussing is the lack of stakeholder collaboration in the sector. As a stakeholder, as the Petroleum Authority of Uganda, how easy have you found it to work with other stakeholders in the sector?
Well, Jackie, give me an opportunity to correct some of the misconceptions my colleague has. First and foremost, in terms of the implementation of the National Spill Contingency Plan, we must agree that there's been a lot of success or efforts that have been done to ensure that the National Oil Spill Contingency Plan is being implemented. Let me start off with the fact that the roles and responsibilities of the different stakeholders in the framework, in the legal and regulatory framework, are very clear. The ultimate responsibility for preparedness and responding to an oil spill falls with the licensee or the entity that is responsible for the oil spill. That's why they are supposed to have in place an oil spill contingency plan. They're supposed to have in place equipment, and they're supposed to have in place personnel who will support the oil spill response operations. We need to appreciate these different roles. The district only comes in if it is a tier 2 and if support is requested from it. If the licensee has enough capability to address or to handle a spill, then they don't need to actually call on the district. They don't need to call on government if the capability is there. Government comes in especially if the capability the licensee has is not sufficient to respond to an oil spill. That is if it's a tier 2 or it's a tier 3. But that does not remove the responsibility the licensee has, even if it's a tier 3. They will still continue with the response operations under the coordination of government. So that is very, very important. The responsibility of the licensee, the responsibility of the local governments, the responsibility of the PAU, NEMA, and the Office of the Prime Minister is very well clearly demarcated in the regulations. But coming back to the level of implementation, a lot of work has been done. As we speak right now, Total Energies and CNOOC Uganda Limited have oil spill contingency plans. They've procured oil spill equipment to respond to oil spills. They also have personnel in place that have been trained to respond if there is an oil spill. But in the event that they have tier 3 or very large oil spills, they have frameworks, first of all, within themselves as operators to support each other if there is need, or if the capability one licensee has is not sufficient to address or to handle the oil spill. But they also have frameworks with international oil spill response companies like OSRL to support them when there is a need or when the spill is very large. For the capabilities for the government entities, especially the local governments, the Petroleum Authority of Uganda and NEMA, a lot of training has been done specifically to coordinate and supervise oil spill response operations. A team, as we speak right now, there's a team in Norway which is taking part in an oil spill exercise, such that they appreciate what the different roles or what needs to be done if you have a very large oil spill. So we cannot say that there are no gaps. There are some gaps, but we must also appreciate the effort that has been put in place by government to ensure that there is readiness and there is capability, starting from the licensee level, district level, but also at the central level, which is under the Office of the Prime Minister.
So in your professional opinion, you would say that stakeholder collaboration is going on perfectly in the oil and gas sector?
Yes, there is a lot of collaboration because oil spill response is not a one-man's job. Oil spills are multifacets, and they can also involve different levels, depending, one, on the type of spill, the quantity of spill, the area where the spill has happened. I'll give you an example. Part of our drilling operations in the Tilenga project are in the Murchison Falls National Area. So that in itself already means that if there was a spill in Murchison Falls National Park, the response operations cannot take place without the involvement of the Uganda Wildlife Authority. So that's where the coordination and the appreciation of the different responsibilities of the different stakeholders is very important. And as we speak right now, the Uganda Wildlife Authority is also making preparations to develop its own Tier 2 oil spill response to support operations specifically just within the Murchison Falls National Park. So there's a lot of collaboration
going on. And apart from joint venture partners or international oil companies, which other bodies could support in the eventuality or possibility of an oil spill? Now,
you'll appreciate why the coordination role sits in the Office of the Prime Minister, because the Office of the Prime Minister is ideally responsible for all the ministries and government agencies. So it can call upon any government agency to support oil spill response operations. I'll give you an example. In case we wanted earth-moving equipment, we know that the Ministry of Works and Transport and also the Uganda Roads Authority have a lot of earth-moving equipment, have a lot of boats. So it will be easy through the Office of the Prime Minister to sanction or to request for this support from any ministry or any government agency. And that's why the coordination role sits under the Office of the Prime Minister, because they can easily coordinate any other government agency that is required for support.
Paul, would you agree with Ronald's submission?
On one point, that the level of preparedness that Uganda has, we need to be honest with each other, is under Tier 1. Tier 1, where the responsibility of managing these spills is still with the oil companies or the licensee at the site level. Within the boundaries, there we can able to say if those simple spills that can happen at the site level, Total has the mechanisms, has a system to manage, SINOC has a system to manage. But we have also been there and we have seen these things. We have seen oil spill response kits on site and we have even inquired. So we know that at that level, there is some level of capacity. But managing Tier 2, which goes beyond the boundaries of the specific site of operations, we must admit and say that we are working, because you're genuinely telling us that you are at the time of developing plans for managing. You have said OWA is developing plans to manage Tier 2. So where is the capacity before you even do the plans themselves? So most of the response mechanism, possible response mechanisms for managing Tier 2 are at the planning level. The institutions, the different institutions are undergoing training. They are also developing these plans that would help them manage Tier 2. And that's what basically my colleague is communicating, only that he doesn't want to be as open as me. And then for Tier 3 involves a lot of resources and a lot of equipment, which even some of the countries like Nigeria do not have, yet they have been producing oil for time. Actually, in 2023 alone, we had 399 incidences of oil spills in Nigeria, both in the drilling, transportation, and even the supply, because the oil spills also go into these guys of petrol stations. It's not only for the work happening in Kingfisher. So for Tier 3 agree that we are still on paper. We are assembling resources. We are still working on capacity building for these institutions. You have talked of trainings going on, benchmarking visits, but I don't think if we had a Tier 3 spill happen in Uganda now, we can respond with ease, because we are incapacitated. We would need now to assemble resources, assemble equipment, and even borrow from ahead. When you look at the oil spill contingency plan itself, I've read it. You will not find any section where they are talking about transboundary collaboration in terms of managing the oil spill. Now, if you cannot collaborate with Congo, DRC, which is our neighbor, and we share common resources with Albert, if you have not consulted with South Sudan, then Sudan, and Egypt over the River Nile, because this is one water body basically, how would you respond to a Tier 3 oil spill? You have not spoken to our neighbors. Actually, for me, Tier 3 oil spill debate should move more than just Uganda. It should be an issue of the Great Lakes region. It should be an issue of East African community, not having Uganda alone, because it cannot respond to a Tier 3 oil spill alone. So we need to start having a discussion with our colleagues, the Rwanda, Congo, and for me, this is one of the proposals as you go forward, because it is overdue. We are supposed to be reviewing this contingency plan. We need to provide for a section where we see how shall we collaborate for transboundary issues in an event that Tier 3 spill occurred.
Ronald, what is the level of national preparedness when it comes to Tier 2 and Tier 3 oil spills?
Well, let me start with Tier 1, because the idea is for you can't have Tier 3 when you don't have Tier 1. You need to first have Tier 1, move to Tier 2, Tier 3, then also have the international collaboration we're speaking about. Now, as we speak right now, I would comfortably say that for Tier 1, we are covered because the licensees have oil spill contingency plans, they have oil spill equipment, and they also have personnel that can respond if there's an oil spill. Now, when it comes to Tier 2, that is the capability right now we are trying to put in place. We are trying to develop the Tier 2 oil spill response plans for the local governments, and that will subsequently also lead to us having equipment hubs that are strategically positioned in the areas where these oil and gas operations are taking place. So that is a process. As we speak right now, it's ongoing, but we must have a plan for that, and that plan is what we've worked on right now, and I had indicated that we should be able to launch these plans at least for the first 3 districts in December of this year, and that will subsequently lead us to having the full-scale Tier 2 capability in these locations.
Isn't
now,
it a point of concern,
he speaks
Ronald?
of Tier 3. Now, I'll tell you this, that Tier 3 is a very large oil spill that even the resources, if we cumulatively collected all the resources in this country, we may not be able in position to have sufficient equipment. But there are already in place mechanisms to support with the Tier 3. There are international oil spill companies that provide that service. OSRL, FOST are companies that globally provide that service. Even when we saw with Macondo, that the spill that happened in the Gulf of Mexico, the US did not have the equipment to respond at that level of oil spill. They had to call on equipment from all over the world, from Norway, from the UK. So that is what we are speaking about, that for Tier 3, it's not about you having the equipment in place, but it's about you having in place the frameworks that can help you call upon support if you need it or if you had a Tier 3. Now, he talks of the collaboration with the neighboring countries like Congo, like Tanzania. Of course, we have some transboundary projects like the ECOP. We also have some, as we speak right now, there is refined oil products that are being shipped from port of Kisumu to Katabi to a refined petroleum products terminal. Now, we need to have in place frameworks that can support you, or that where Uganda can support Kenya, Uganda can support Tanzania, or Uganda can support Congo if there is a transboundary oil spill. But that does not remove the fact that before even you have that framework, internally in Uganda, we must have built our own capability, because you cannot support your neighbor if you yourself don't have the level of preparedness. Now, that is the next phase that we are looking at. And of course, this is going to be spearheaded through the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, because now we are dealing, it's 2 countries that are trying to put in place a framework. So to answer your question, as we speak right now, we have some reasonable level of capability to especially address Tier 1 and Tier 2 oil spills, but we also have in place frameworks that can help us call upon international oil companies in the event that we had a Tier 3 oil spill. But that does not take away the fact that there are still some gaps and there are still some areas where we need to improve. And if you can allow me, I can speak a little bit to this. They are specifically about 4 areas. One is the fact that we have these plans, we have this equipment, we have the personnel. We need to train them to be able to feel comfortable, to lead or to respond if there's an oil spill. And that can only be achieved through doing routine exercises and drills. So that is something that we are looking forward to. We've initiated some spills on a quarterly basis. At least every quarter there's an exercise or there's a drill. If not at the licensee level, at least there's one with the district local governments. Then the other aspect that we are looking at is to set up state-of-the-art emergency or oil spill command centers. So these will help in making sure that you coordinate the oil spill response operations, and also will be a sort of a unified response where you can have different stakeholders called upon to support the operations. Then the other thing is also, he talked of the funds, and this issue has already been flagged. There is need to have an emergency fund where financial resources can be drawn from in the event if there is an oil spill. But then also, lastly, we are trying to work with the sector players to put in place an oil spill mutual aid group. And this again speaks to the concern it was raising of where we don't have tier 2 or tier 3 capability. Now you can imagine if we have over 5 different entities that have oil spill response equipment, and these also have trained personnel that can respond or that can support oil spill operations. The best thing to do is to bring all these 5 entities into a mutual group. That means that you have the collective equipment or the collective technical expertise instead of having different entities to respond to an oil spill. These come into a mutual group which you can call upon if there is an oil spill. And we've started engagements with the sector players to put in place an oil spill mutual aid group.
I absolutely understand. I think from your contribution, Ronald, I understand that as a country, we're still in our baby stages. We have countries that have been doing this, like you've mentioned, for years, and they still face challenges. Yes. So you were saying to appreciate what we have whilst we work on getting what we do not have. So to that end, what best practices can we pick up as Uganda from the rest of the world that would do us well to implement here?
Well, to start off is the need for us to have what we call large-scale exercises. We need to do this because this is the only way you're going to make sure that your equipment is tested, your plans are tested, the trained technical personnel you have, their confidence in responding to oil spill is also tested and is also built. So we need to undertake annual large-scale oil spill exercises, as that's the only way to test all the infrastructure and also to identify if there are any areas of improvement and if there are any gaps. Secondly, we need to make sure that we have well-equipped emergency command centers. The plan is not to have a few of these, like 3 of them. We can have one right in the region where the oil spill operations are happening. We can have another, like in Kampala here, like at the office of the Prime Minister. And these need to be adapted to respond to or to coordinate oil spills. The other thing that we need clearly to put in place to make sure that we have an emergency fund to respond to oil spills. Because when an oil spill happens, you need all the resources. Therefore, it's important that you have some, I would say, safety net of resources that you can draw upon if you have an oil spill. So I think those are some of the areas where we need to improve, or we need to make sure that we have this put in place.
Thank you, Ronald.
Yeah.
Paul, I want to ask you the same question. As a research fellow with OCURD, what best practices from the rest of the world would we do well with picking up and implementing here in Uganda?
Yeah, thank you very much. Of course, my colleagues have been traveling very many times to Norway and other countries to benchmark on how to manage an oil spill. And of course, there is no doubt that even the contingency plan was supported by the Norwegians. Now, for me, what I would expect to see as one of the best practices is that when you go to learn, you don't learn only the installations, you even learn how the planning was done. because it is the planning that perfects the implementation. For example, if he's talking about that there are frameworks that can facilitate international collaboration, for us to be able to manage Tier 3 spill, we need to see this in the National Oil Spill Management Contingency Plan. If it's not there, then we start wondering what they want. Then we have shared, even we share privately. He knows we talk and about experiences of what they have been learning the other side. But of course, arising from a number of challenges, and noting that it is a process, they are yet to put in practice some of the lessons that they have learned. Because the Norwegians, for example, have a very strong oil spill management preparedness response mechanism. He will testify to this, where they have even recognized it. The reporting, the information flow, the drills are always done on a timely basis. And we are no longer talking about too much people. There is a level of even use of technology to be able to man and to be able to strengthen these centers. So we wouldn't expect that when you are planning to manage Tier 3, you're expecting to use a phone to call and communicate, hello, a spill has happened. So those are some of the things we want our government to be looking at as we move to the next level of preparedness. Because you cannot know, yes, we are taking a process by process approach where we say we have capacity to manage Tier 1, now we will have build capacity to manage Tier 2, but that doesn't, for me, in the approach of disaster preparedness, the oil spill will not tell you that tomorrow we will come as Tier 1 or tomorrow we will come as Tier 3. For us, a layman would want to know what would happen if we had a blow-up happening at once. What would happen? It would mean we don't have to wait to go into those small processes. We need to give it a priority. And for me, I was concerned when you start saying that we need to create a fund, because I thought even the fund was there already. Because if we don't have money to put these things in place.
So which best practices do you think we can pick up from the rest of the world?
Number one is to put in place the necessary funding mechanism.
So you agree with Ronald?
Yes, I agree with him on that. But the challenge is, he says that they are prepared before putting in place the mechanisms. We need that level of honesty. And for me, when he starts saying, okay, we are working on this, this is where we need support. Because for us, actually, we are there to give support to government. When you tell us that you need assistance, for example, in mobilizing district local governments to start this debate, we come on board. We come on board and we say, this is now the focus of the debate we should have. It will even define priorities of the civil society that is working in oil and gas sector for the next time. And then involve us. Because the other key lesson that you may have failed to learn when you did benchmarking was to make the process participatory. Because I know we got involved on a minimal scale when we were developing the contingency management plan, but you are talking about a number of processes that are going on. Who is participating? If the district local government leaders are not participating, if you don't have some key people from civil society participate and know, and yet you say it is a responsibility of everyone, who is participating? So the participatory nature of how these other countries like Norway have come up with oil spill management mechanism, oil spill management response and mechanisms is what we should also expect to see here. Issues of clearly cutting out the roles and making a simple coordination structure. For me, we don't need to have very large documents where you first need to read in an emergency situation. We need to have very clear roles that are simple to interpret by even a local citizen. Because either by the law is very clear, it even talks of a person, and you also know that the responsibility to manage an oil spill does not only stop on government agencies, even individuals. And that's why the spirit of the law is about a person. And a person in this case means an entity, means even an individual. So if someone who is working, and we have very many people now in petrol stations, you know how they dispose of the used oil itself, how it ends in the environment, because they don't even know their responsibilities, because you have not involved them,
so
the
participation
citizens.
of all
Yes,
stakeholders.
every individual, even we need someone who lives near Njiri 3 to be able to know that a spill has happened. So I should run to the chairman LOC2 and report. And then the chairman LOC2 should trigger the communication in that line. But this person is not aware, and yet the same guidelines and regulations provide for that. The other important thing is the way you disclose information. We have seen in very many countries where we have learned about these best practices. This information is everywhere. They know that there is an oil spill, they know how to even classify it, they know how to define it, and they know what to do in an event of danger. And that also helps them to manage spills at an individual level. But when you only share information amongst the government agencies only, then you create a very big problem, because we fail to get how to support you as the citizens of the Republic of Uganda.
Thank you, Paul. Thank you, Ronald, as well. Gentlemen, this conversation has been enlightening, and I hope the stakeholders responsible can pick up a few points from this conversation. You're more than welcome to always come back for another conversation. Here at Next Media, we take the priority of our environment very seriously. So we do things like Tasso Butonde. So please come back another time to carry on this conversation or see what we have done differently in the oil and gas sector. Thank you very much for keeping it here in NBS. Stay tuned, we have plenty more coming in stock. Take care.